Thanks, Jonathan, for having us. Like Kevin said, if you guys have any questions at any time, don't be afraid to type it out in the Q&A or raise your hand. We're pretty relaxed with this, so we'll be happy to answer at any time. We're not on sort of any super tight agenda here. That being said, we'll 100% get your guys out on time. It's the end of the day. Last talk. Um, these talks are going to be about how to determine and improve the ROI on your extension. We understand that your CET extension is not the product that you deliver, but it's a catalyst to sell your product. Um, and we truly believe that your CT extension is a journey, and that we should always be trying to improve to get value out of that product. That catalyst to sell your product is going to change, and you should always be paying attention to it. Very similarly to how you as a manufacturer consistently change your product every month, every year, even. Your CET extension should change with it, not just adding that product, but also looking at ways to improve your CET extension to um, make your users want to use your extension more. Um, so if you're going to take away three really big things from this, and you really want to go back to your team and say, hey, here's the three things we need with our extension. Um, First, going to be start with a catalog extension. We truly believe that that makes you take a look at your data and maximizes that long-term return on investment. Um, it creates a great foundation for your PGC extension and allows you to set up for that second point, which is get great user feedback. So Derek had a whole presentation on human-centered design, and here at OST, we really truly believe in human-centered design and how to get that. How do we collect that user feedback? How do we build our extension around the users, not just in a business and technology kind of space? And the third thing is going to be creating your extension ownership team. I think, being around this business for a decent amount of time now, you kind of see um, people who want CET extensions. They'll come to us. They'll say, "Hey, we want a CET extension," and they just kind of think of it as like, "We're going to check this box. We're going to say we're in CET now, and that's going to be it." And for those of you that have a CET extension, hopefully you kind of smiled and you said like that's not the case here, and that your CET extension is always going to be evolving. And how can we maximize the return on investment by creating a great extension team? What roles do you need? What do you need to serve those roles? How can you reduce expenses in those roles, but also get a great extension out of it?
So the first big point that Kyle just brought up is that we believe that you should start with a catalog extension. And I'm going to preface this by saying we're going to kind of briefly go over this because our other presentation from the last breakout session was a much more in-depth look about why we think you should always start with a catalog extension and you should always have a catalog extension on your back end. So if this really interests you and we didn't go into enough detail here for you there, you can definitely check out the recording after the conference and see our other breakout session. But basically, one of the main reasons we believe you should start with a catalog extension is how quickly it can start getting you return on investment. A catalog extension can also or often be done in about the time it would take to do one or two product lines in PGC. And what that means is your entire portfolio is going to be available in your CET extension, and users can choose anything from your desks, your accessories, your chairs, and they can put those all in the scene. So all of your products are available at the tip of their fingers. Um, if you're a new user to CET, and this is where this presentation is catching you, that means you can start getting return on investment early because your entire product line is in CET and can be specified and sold. And a lot of the times when you move into a PGC extension, you're going to need a catalog anyways. So by starting with the catalog extension, you'll have return on investment going the entire time you're developing your PGC extension. Even though users want that PGC, they want that smart extension. Starting with the catalog will get your ROI started, and then you can move into PGC from there in a logical manner. A catalog will also develop your revenue stream. So I like this graphic. I touched on it in the other presentation as well, but your catalog extension will get a 30-second head start in a race. And the entire time it's racing ahead of your PGC extension, you're going to be making ROI. You're going to be making that money back and your revenue stream is going to be building. Eventually your PGC extension is going to catch up to it as people realize you have an awesome PGC extension built on top of a catalog extension. But you get that head start by beginning with a catalog extension. Your ROI is in place and your extension is going to start making you money. Now, if we're hitting you right now where you have a partly PGC extension and you don't have a catalog extension, it's not too late to go back and fill out the rest of your portfolio and look at your catalog extension. And again, I would urge you to go back and watch if you're interested in this or if this is where we're hitting you with this presentation, because you can go back and watch our other presentation about why catalog is so important.
When we start with a catalog, really what we're trying to focus on is your data, and that your product data is really important to creating any extension in CET. You know, there's out there in a manufacturer space, there's going to be some type of data export that it's going to include the features, options, part numbers, materials, SKU buildups of all your product data. And we want to be able to leverage that and find a way where we can export that from your ERP system, not just once, but every time that changes. A good example I have is we had a client, and I learned a lot from this client in that they wanted a catalog extension. We got their SIF data, excuse me, and then we worked with them to create a catalog extension in CET. Well, their data wasn't fantastic, and we kind of ran into some roadblocks in grabbing what was from their ERP system. So we ended up massaging a lot of their data in a one-time way manually. And then the next month came and they're like, we're ready for updates to this catalog. And we just kind of skipped over that. And, from a failure lab point of view, we're like, oh, we need to really look at how we can do this in a continued basis. Like, this is not a one-time thing. This is an every month or every quarter kind of thing, depending on when your manufacturer or when you as a manufacturer update your product information. Data is king for all extensions. Even in a PGC extension, your graphics are most likely going to come from your data. Your features and options are going to mostly come from your data, and so that leads to things like renders are not going to look great if your models are junk. We can't, as a developer, just go in and sprinkle pixie dust on your models and run like cleanup model.exe or something like that. Like, that doesn't exist. So so if your models are not very good, like, we should clean that up in that catalog phase portion, and not when we have a fully blown out extension development team waiting on your internal team to improve your models. It also allows, as I gave a little or alluded to in the story earlier, it allows to work out integration roadblocks. So, as you're working with, your internal IT team to kind of, how do we export the data in a single source of truth and then load up that as our CET catalog every single month or every single quarter. That can be a problem. Cross-functional teams pose some issues, and in some companies, that can be very siloed. So how do we handle that in a small, very low risk scenario? Because as we kind of say, catalog extensions are easier to create. You're going to have less risk, less investment. So we can kind of hammer out some of those big details with the data early on the catalog extension.
So now that you've got your catalog extension, you're getting some return on investment from that. You're working into your PGC extension, or maybe you already have a full PGC extension. What else can you do? Where can you squeeze the return out of investment out of your extension? Where can you see the most improvement that's going to get you that ROI? The biggest thing to note is that your users are who drives what you should be developing. As we mentioned earlier, Derek had a presentation on human-centered design earlier, which you guys should definitely check out. It was awesome. But basically, a big point of it was that the designers using this are the ones that should have the drive on this feedback. The developers aren't the users. The extension owner isn't the users. You're trying to make an extension that's going to be good to use by the designers, whether they be internal designers or external designers. And that user feedback is going to be coming from those designers, and that's what should be driving your extension development. Because if you make them happy, there's going to be more people using your extension and happily using your extension. So there's a lot of ways to get user feedback, and I'll walk through some of these. Um, Surveys and focus groups, they could be whether your extension's already on the marketplace or you're just trying to send it out to a select group of people to see what kind of experience people are having with your extension. So you'll get a lot of things like pain points, where they're struggling to specify with your products and what you should work on to make it easier for them. You'll get things like what they like, what they want to see from other extensions as well is a big one that we often see at OST, because some people come in with full time using another client's extension, and then they're trying to transition into your extension. They're like, well, I liked this and I liked this. And while you don't always want to listen and do exactly what they're telling you, you always want to be listening to them. So another thing that you can look at is the forums and the briefcase from Configura. People are going to bring up their problems there. They want to see that their questions are answered. So if you go on the briefcase, you should have someone looking at that and acknowledging that at least you're going to be working on that. The next one is going to be your internal team. If you have internal designers, those are the people that know and use your product exclusively. And they're the people that you should be looking at for their pain points. If they're struggling with something, if they're using the heck out of one of your product lines and it's not PGC or it's not good PGC, they're the ones you should be listening to. So you should be asking them frequently what they're feeling about your CET extension. And lastly, sales data. If you don't want to reach out specifically to users, you don't want to talk to your internal team, and you have this catalog extension and you're looking where to go with your PGC extension, you can see what people are buying together, how they're bundling things, and you can intuitively set up your PGC extension to maybe bundle some of that stuff on their own, or maybe work on the experience of your extension to make it easy to bundle things like that. And if someone's buying a lot of one product line, maybe that should be the next one you bring into PGC. There's a lot of options that you can see just from what people are buying and how they're buying them from your product.
As you collect user feedback, what you do with that user feedback is incredibly important to the users. The users are the ones that drive your extension, and you'll see great extensions have really good open communication with users. That's a really big thing in good extensions on the CET marketplace. If you're a user and no extension's perfect, and if they're gonna use your product for a very large deal that they just are quoting or they're specifying, they want to know that if they run into issues, your team's your team's gonna help them, whether that's a workaround, whether that's a bug that needs fixing, whether anything really is better than nothing. I see a lot of extensions in the marketplace that they won't respond to users' briefcase posts. You go on their briefcase, it's just user questions for the last 2 years with no response. And if I was going to put myself in the user's shoes, I would feel pretty skeptical of using their product, knowing that if I ran into any problems, I don't know if I can get help. That's a little scary to me. I better hope that the product's like really cheap or something. But and that's not always the best case. If you're the manufacturer, you don't always want to rely on being, you want to be easy to use. So you want to look at to see what needs to be made PGC. What is the most specified? What is the most complex? Ends up being a kind of a function of those two result and what needs the most attention. A really complex product line that's not specified very often is not going to return a lot to your end ROI. But if it's specified a lot, even if it's really easy, maybe those little minor enhancements, for making it PGC or even just making something just a little bit easier. If it's specified a lot, it can really multiply itself in that ROI calculation that you measure up. Another big thing we see from user feedback, I see it with a lot of clients, is with needed enhancements, things like exports. Those can get, because when you're working with an extension, you don't reach out to your external users a lot, users that work for dealerships. You work a lot with internal users that don't use the same ordering system. So they kind of have some problems, and it ends up being like they're not using your product because they can't order from CET, or they can't export even to things like 2020 to order. So it's kind of like a little, getting that user feedback is really important when you're looking at ROI, because at the end of the day, your users are the ones that are buying your product. It doesn't matter that the picture's pretty. Um, so examples of user feedback would be, as I've said earlier, the export problems. I've had a client in a few different situations that has said, well, we asked our users and it turns out that they can't order from CET. And you're like, we've been doing this for how long and we can't order from CET? This sounds like a day one kind of thing, and that's kind of a mistake that was made with not working closely with the users in um, from the beginning. Another big thing that people see is installation drawings. Uh, when you're creating an extension, people tend to get focused on the pretty pictures. So they focus on the renderings and the how it looks in 3D, how it looks in 2D, how can we auto place parts. That looks great. And then you load up the scene in Paperspace and the tags are just a nightmare. So it's like, well, how can the installers even install this? And so you end up being that people have a really hard time. They end up having to specify in CET and then specify it in another specification tool to even get installation drawings. And it's kind of like, well, we probably should identify this at day one. Um, Another big thing is product rules are unclear. This kind of comes to that external user versus internal user kind of thing, where if you're an internal user at a manufacturer, um, I think by definition you're going to have a better understanding of the product rules for that manufacturer. But if you're a dealership that specifies, maybe upwards of 6 or 7 different brands, you can't guarantee that they're going to know your specification rules really well. So getting that feedback on how you can what kind of is a struggle and how can that software tool help um, bridge that knowledge gap there. Um, another thing can be a hard to navigate library. Um, Things like looking at your users for how the library should be navigated. How can we get rid of the data structure that a programmer might think makes sense, and how can we look at a user from a user design, user experience point of view, and be like, these product lines specify with each other. We should probably put them close to each other. How can we manipulate maybe even sales by product? We talk about, or you go to the grocery store and product placement's really big in the grocery store, and how can we make people impulse purchase? And that can be something that as a manufacturer we look at too. If we want certain accessories to work with certain products, how can we align them within that library? um, and then ultimately what takes really really long to specify, um, and that can be things, just really small things. I mean, that end up being really big. Think of things like electrical systems and support systems. Um, Really, like panels in general can be kind of difficult. When you get into that tile placement logic, and how can we identify these edge cases and identify how users are trying to maximize the product that you're offering without making it super hard to use.
So you started with your catalog extension, you're transitioning into your PGC extension, you're listening to your users and trying to improve your extension in a way that your user wants, but how do you put any of that into action? Well, that's where your user or your extension ownership team is going to come in. The roles we have on this list are what we at OST believe every extension should have in one form or another. And Up here, this doesn't mean you need to have at least 7 people on your extension ownership team, right? One person can do multiple of these roles, or multiple of these roles can be filled, or one of these roles can be filled by multiple people. There can be a lot of different sizes of extension ownership teams, but it's important to realize that somebody is doing everything on this list in order to have continuous improvement on your journey through a CET extension. So the first person that's important, obviously, is the product owner, the person that's in charge of the extension and overseeing everything and make sure that these team roles are all filled and everything is on track to what the users want to see. The catalog manager is another important person who needs to be on the back end, adding in new products, discontinuing old products, making sure models, layers, everything like that in the catalog is up to date and properly represented. Having somebody to train people in your extension is a big thing because sometimes things that may be intuitive to your internal designers may not be to your external designers and vice versa. So you definitely want someone that at least is putting in the extra effort to show your users the best way to use your extension because that's how you had it developed. Extension public relations is what we call this one, which basically just shows that you're listening to your users, you're reaching out to your users, someone who goes in and answers briefcase posts, someone who will work with users to fix their issues that may be specific to your extension or may not be specific to your extension. But if they reach out to your company, someone needs to answer that and someone needs to handle that. And that gives the users that feel good, they're listening to me kind of feeling. The subject matter expert is important to go hand in hand with the developers because a lot of time developers don't know your product rules and they might, but they might not. And the subject matter expert is the one at the end of the day who is telling the developers what the rules should be on the back end and how the PGC extension should be structured. And then along with that, quality assurance, which basically just makes sure that everything is tip-top shape. And when the developers put something into your PGC extension, it's functioning properly, following all the rules, and is ready to go into production for all the designers to use.
Okay, I promise this is not a sales side or a sales slide. John and I are not salespeople. If you want to talk to a salesperson, I can get you in touch with one. And I understand that we are an external. John and I serve external roles here at OST, so we work with clients on a regular basis. We're the developers. So if you went back a second. John and I are in that developer phase or that developer section of an extension. And when you're talking about maximizing your return on investment, I think one of the big things we look at is what can be internal and what can be external. Every company has strengths. If you sell furniture, one of your strengths is selling furniture. I hope it is. It should be. And as we take a step back, you kind of have to identify what your company's strengths are. If you're fantastic at IT and that you can train people to put your products into CET, then let's do it. There's no reason to go external. We understand that it is, a little bit more, it can cost a little bit more per month, but we do see that going internal 100% can hurt ROI. And that's a pretty big statement. But when we talk about the CET journey with extensions, John and I have been on several CET journeys, and we've been there before. We understand, how to make things like look and understand. Derek can provide a great design perspective, and maybe those aren't your company's strengths, and that's okay. And I think acknowledging that is the first step to maximizing your return on investment. And what this eliminates is team bloat. And I think you see it sometimes with extensions is that they'll identify like, okay, we're going to go 100% internal with this CET extension. And they're like, okay, we want to get our existing 70 product lines into CET. So they're like, okay, how do we meet that goal in 2 years? So they go and they get 12 developers, 3 QAs. They get the whole gambit, right? And they work for 2 years and it's done. And now they have this massive team, and maybe next year they only add 3 new product lines. And now you have a team that can definitely pump out a lot more product lines. And what are you going to do with them? You going to like you can maybe move them internally, but acknowledging that team bloat in the beginning is very important. Sometimes bringing in, some experts can help speed up that process, can help train your internal people. Um, like John and I have both had to do that, done that over the years. Um, work with internal teams, and we feel like that's ultimately the best return on investment. It might cost a little bit more in the beginning, but you pay dividends towards the end.
So when you're looking into ROI, there's a lot of things you can consider. And the 3 points that we hit already are the three that we identified and have seen over the years a lot of companies suffering with. But there's other things you got to consider too. And we're going to quickly break down just a few things into what you have to consider when you're an extension owner and what you maybe should consider when you're an extension owner if you want to really improve your ROI. So I'll start here with what you have to consider. Version updates. Configura pushes out version updates every 6 months. And your extension, if you want users to keep using it, you need to have someone on the back end making sure that it complies with the new version update. If it doesn't, your extension is going to break and all of your users are going to stop using it. The best way is to be ahead of the game and be ready to jump on a version update every 6 months. The other thing is new and discontinued products. As a company, your product line is probably frequently changing. You're adding new things, you're getting rid of things that people aren't using, but your CET extension isn't going to automatically do that if it's not a pure catalog extension. You want people to be adding those new product lines to PGC so they have that hype, that buzz around them, and people are ready to use them. And similarly, if you're discontinuing products, you may not just want to cut them out of everybody's already existing drawings, but you may want to add something in that says, hey, we don't actually serve this to you anymore. This isn't a product that we offer. I know we used to, but we don't anymore. And you need someone to be doing that on the back end as well. And lastly, the term that we identify as blockers is basically makes your extension unusable when it's coming from the marketplace. So maybe something that is wrong with the quantity on some of your parts or something that's wrong with the installation drawings that makes designers say, no, we can't use this. This isn't going to work. It could even go so far as to crash CET itself. You try and bring in a work surface and CET crashes. They're not going to use that work surface. These blockers are things that you need a team or at least a person ready to quickly identify and jump on to fix so that you can push out a new version and continue to get return on investment from your extension before the designers decide it's not worth the hassle.
There are also things that we believe that you should want to consider to maximize your return on investment. These are really some things that are really nice to have. Um, we put the user requested feedback and the nice to have. We kind of went back and forth and should you must consider it. And Derek's probably screaming that we should consider it. But we have it in there because, quite frankly, we see extensions without user feedback, and yeah, they're not great extensions, and a lot of people don't use them. Um, I think the definition of want and needs a little blurred there. We talk about business intelligence. OST. We have a tool that can identify uh, how users are using the extension. So looking at what gets brought into the scene, for how long are they using it, and then bringing that back in a kind of a sterilized form to the extension development team to kind of see who's specifying, not really who, but what is being specified and for how long is it being specified. So we can really see what products are being used and how can we help people with that. Integration is also a really big, nice consideration to have. Um, if you have someone who manually enters in data changes every single month, that can cost time and money by definition. But creating a nice tool that allows you to send to all your specification tools, not just CET, but all the others out there, one source of your data every single month will for sure help. In the end, we talk about effective user communication. So there is a big slide in our other presentation that talks about effective user communication. So, things like live chat or, being quick to respond to the briefcase will allow users to have more faith in your extension. Creating a perfect extension, I don't think is an ideal situation. I've been doing this for a while, and I don't know if a perfect extension exists. But what we can do is be empathetic and understand that we're here to go with the users. We're here to be with the users. So when they have a problem, work quickly to address it and identify that problem. So I think those are really nice to have, and you need to have a lot of systems in place in order to have that communication be brought to you through lots of different mediums. Um, I think a few examples. I said live chat, briefcase. There's the email function in CET. Um, so various websites or various things through your manufacturer's website. So those are a couple of things in the what else category. That pretty much wraps up our presentation. So if anyone has any questions, that would be weird.
There is a question from Fong in the Q&A box there. How many people do you think an extension should have to get the most from the software? Do you guys have any thoughts on that?
Thanks for the question, Fong. I think the people thing is kind of dependent on how much time that person has to give and what the user base looks like. A closed brand and an open brand are going to have for sure different needs. And I think you definitely need a product owner. I think one of the things that I've seen that has always gone wrong is when nobody owns the extension and no one's responsible for the extension, then it just becomes this wild child of problems. So having someone who's ultimately responsible is really important. Um, from a developer QA point of view, it really depends on where you're at in your extension journey, what you're doing, if you're in a maintenance point of view, if you're still developing. Um, we don't really think that there's a specific amount of people that matter. We just think that there needs to be each one of those roles. I can go back to that slide really quick. We think each one of these roles is really important. So making sure that someone's managing your catalog, someone's training your users, someone's reaching out to your users, and then having someone who is a subject matter expert, developer, and QA. I think from a developer point of view, you don't want to make sure that the developer and the QA is not the same person.
But I'll jump in and piggyback on that. I mean, the cop-out answer to your question is it depends. It depends on your product, and it depends on the timing that you want to get things out. If you want to get your entire 70 product lines out in a year, you're going to need a lot of developers, a lot of QA, and you need your process to be quickly moving. And we've seen that in our experience, but we've also seen, personally me, in a situation before where I was the developer, the QA, and the catalog manager at once. And you can probably get away with having a very slow moving extension where your product owner is training, doing extension public relations, and they're the subject matter expert for your developer who's doing QA on their own and managing your catalog. You can probably get away with that. You're just not going to get a lot done with it. So again, the cop-out answer is kind of it depends on what your need is and how fast you want to see these things moving.
I think starting small and setting measurables is really important. So, start small with your extension development team and then set measurables on how fast you want to move and how fast you want to respond to your users.
I'd also like to quickly circle back and say being catalog manager, developer, and QA at once is not fun. You don't want to ever make anybody do that.
Good question. Other questions? Like I said, can either raise hand to vocalize those or via the QA or the chat function. Other questions for John and Kyle at this point?
Return on investment is definitely a topic that is about where your extension is in its journey, and we can only do so much to speculate on what we've seen in the past. So please feel free to ask any specific questions you may have, and that might help the others here as well, or anything generic you can come up with as well.
I'll mention a couple things while everyone is thinking through those questions that they want to ask John and Kyle at this point. Understand being involved in these virtual sessions can be kind of draining, even though these are half-day conference for CET Experience this year. It can be tough being engaged in front of the computer all day. I do want to remind everyone that there is kind of a daily wrap-up session from 4:50 until 5 o'clock today. Make sure to pop back in that. Have an opportunity to ask any questions. There'll be some closing remarks for the day. I just want to make sure that everyone doesn't just log out and wrap it up once the session is done. Make sure to pop back into that last 10-minute closeout session for the day. Make sure that we all wrap up day one in a good spot and are prepared tomorrow to tackle day number 2. So I'll throw that piece of housekeeping out there. What other questions? We got a chat here. Just some kudos from Anna in the chat. So I guess I'll say if there's no other questions, we can hang out for a little bit if anyone wants to answer any questions. But if not, thank you so much for Jonathan and Kyle for your time and sharing your expertise. And hope everyone had a good, third breakout session of CET Experience.
Yeah, and thanks to everybody who attended for listening to us drone on and on. Hopefully you at least took something away that can help you improve your extension. So.
Yeah, thanks everyone.